Okay, so the main reason why I held off on making this list for such a long time is because I didn't own a Sweet Dreams or Celestial Saber. And unlike the two weapons I was missing in the gun ranking, there's very little, if any, practical information on those two swords. And even though I already knew both weapons would be ranked pretty low on the list, I still wanted to know everything about them before making this, to accurately rank them. And I am so glad I held off. There's a notable amount of depth to those two swords. Also, stop watching my old tier list. It's terrible. I'm gonna keep that VOD up, but it's honestly embarrassing looking back on it, seeing me rank swords without knowing about entire game mechanics that change the way some weapons are used, now that I know all the little intricacies of each weapon. Ranking all 23 swords and spiral knights from worst to best. Despite what it might seem like, I vastly prefer this game's melee combat over other playstyles. Swords, as you could probably guess, are close-range melee weapons that typically deal a lot of damage. Some are fast, some are slow, some are good at causing stats effects, others are good at being a nuisance to your party. Whatever type of player you are, there's probably a sword for you, unless it's on the bottom half of this list. Because oh man, there are some real stinkers in here. Swords heavily revolve around a surprisingly complex stagger system that the game does very little to tell you about. A system which isn't exactly absent in the other two weapon types, it's just not relevant in most playstyles. Number 23, Dread Venom Striker. Okay, I've had to completely restructure this paragraph because these first two swords were originally swapped around, and it would have stayed that way if it wasn't for a tiny detail that makes Dread Venom Striker one of the worst swords in the game. For those who don't know, I'm talking about the fact that it can't stagger, like, at all. It just doesn't stagger enemies. Okay, technically it can. The only attacks in Dread Venom Striker's entire moveset that have the ability to flinch are the last hits of its normal attack chain and charge attack. But what are you even expecting to use this thing on? This weapon class doesn't excel at anything. Cutters have abysmally short reach, to the point where you have to basically be hugging whatever you're trying to hit. They deal just enough knockback to push whatever you're attacking slightly out of your range, to the point where you end up missing half of the attack chain. Both cutters are stuck with normal damage for some reason, meaning it deals no damage. It takes way too long to get to the last hit of the attack chain, the one that actually staggers, and if you do, you rarely meet the damage threshold to be able to flinch. It's a melee weapon that contradicts itself. And the charge attack is just... why? You'd honestly be better off unplugging your keyboard than to try and force this thing to work. It has all the same issues as the regular attack. It doesn't stagger, it has too little range, it's really easy to miss whatever you're swinging at, and the attack lasts way too long for you to not get hit. It doesn't matter what stats effect this sword can inflict if the charge attack is borderline unusable. The ability to inflict poison isn't any good if there's not a reliable way to inflict it, while also taking advantage of it. Poison is one of the best things you could have added to a weapon, and yet Dread Venom Striker is still one of the worst weapons in the game. Number 22, Wild Hunting Blade. A legendary cutter feared by even the mightiest of wolvers and chromalisks. A mighty blade with all the force of a wet napkin. Why does this deal normal damage? No, seriously, this sword is literally designed to kill beasts. Why is it not a piercing weapon? It wouldn't even fix any of the issues that cutters have. I'm just upset that this isn't the case. I'm gonna let the footage speak for itself. Every time you see me use the charge attack on something, and I actually flinch whatever I'm attacking, is a time where Dread Venom Striker would have resulted in me getting hit, possibly knocked away from my target, and in turn completely missing the second half of the charge attack. It doesn't matter how much weight Dread Venom Striker's poison is pulling if you're not able to deal damage to begin with, and vice versa can be said about Wild Hunting Blade. It's not a particularly great weapon, but compared to Dread Venom Striker, it's a step in the right direction, which is... wow. You really have to mess up a weapon type for strong poison to be the inferior option. As mentioned earlier, Spiral Knights' melee combat revolves around flinching enemies to interrupt attacks. I thought it'd be better to briefly go over how this works, as it's something I'll be bringing up numerous times throughout this video. Fish McClishy has a good in-depth guide on this, but to summarize, in order to flinch an enemy, two criteria must be met. First, you'll need to meet a damage threshold. This is different for every monster in the game. Some take very little damage to flinch, while others don't stagger so easily, requiring you to deal the majority of their health before faltering. Secondly, the attack has to have enough impact to stagger. Almost all charge attacks are able to flinch, and most swords can flinch on the final swing of an attack chain. A handful of monsters also have moves that can be flinched by any attack, as long as the damage threshold is met. Another way to test if an attack has enough impact to flinch is with the guild training bags. They have a special flinching animation with virtually no damage threshold to be met. Also, throughout this entire video, you're going to hear me flip-flop between using flinch and stagger. The two are synonymous in this context. Number 21 through 18, the 4 calibers. I'm just going to lump the 4 of them together for convenience. I'm getting the same vibes as I did with tortle guns and shard bombs. They're all just mediocre weapons, and you'd be better off ignoring them. But I'm here to talk about them anyways. Celestial Saber is by far the worst one, for the sole reason that it can't flinch enemies on its third swing. It is difficult to overstate how much of a difference this makes to the weapon. It's so much of a detriment that Celestial Saber was a contender for the worst sword in the game. But the charge attack works just fine, and the caliber weapon type is at least decent. I was really hoping that Celestial Saber was just a Leviathan blade but with stun, and I really wish that was the case because it would be so much better than what it currently is. Leviathan Blade is the most basic of the bunch. It's got consistent high damage, technically tied with Saber but without being complete garbage. Regardless, it ends up falling behind the other two in performance. It's probably the simplest sword you can get your hands on, and it's got no bonuses attached to it, which also means that it's the least interesting of the bunch. The damage penalty of Cold Iron Vanquisher is honestly pretty negligible. Every other caliber has some benefit that outshines a damage bonus, but Cold Iron Vanquisher has a neat characteristic that everyone probably knows by now, so I don't know why I'm introducing it this way. The charge attack has significantly reduced knockback, which is remarkable on this weapon type. On some knockback resistant monsters, it allows you to hit up to 3 times with a single attack, which more than makes up for the damage loss. And even if this isn't the case, the lessened knockback makes spacing and positioning follow-up attacks way easier. And then Sweet Dreams, the latest addition to my arsenal, genuinely caught me by surprise. I was fully expecting this to be the worst caliber in the game, which is an opinion I've heard echoed throughout the community for the last couple of years, and it couldn't be farther from the truth. It shares the reduced knockback of Cold Iron Vanquisher, which is already the best trait to have, while also inflicting stun. But get this, both weapons deal the same damage. For all intents and purposes, Sweet Dreams is a direct upgrade from Cold Iron Vanquisher, making it the best caliber in the game. Although it technically has the same chance to inflict stun as Celestial Saber, the lowered knockback allows you to more frequently hit the same target multiple times, which then causes more stun procs. If you want to take acquisition into consideration, Cold Iron Vanquisher is your best bet to go with. But keep in mind, acquisition is not a factor that affected any of these rankings. Number 17, Tourbillon. Notice how I've only mentioned normal damage weapons so far? Yeah, this is why normal damage sucks. It's better to have a weapon that excels in 2/3 of the game's content rather than having one that's mediocre everywhere, especially when you consider the option of bringing another damage type that covers the third you are ineffective against. And on top of that, the majority of weapons that exclusively deal normal damage are just bad. But Tourbillon is kinda nice. It's the only sword that fires a projectile on its light attack, making it great for hitting switches and destroying terrain. It can easily proc dodging and blocking AI, which can be problematic, but if you know what you're doing, you can use this to your advantage. The competition between Tourbillon and the last few entries were very close. They're all equally as mediocre as each other. This charge attack has to be bugged. I refuse to believe that this is how it's intended to perform. You're going to give brandishes the damage values that they have, autoguns and magnuses the ability to one-shot almost every monster in the game, Dark Retribution the everything that it has, disc guns exist, and yet with Tourbillon, you're lucky to hit the same target twice with a charge attack. Oh, and by the way, it deals less damage than the regular attack for some reason. You may as well not even use it. This attack has to be bugged. There's just no other way. Because it literally is bugged. Despite that, Tourbillon's charge attack does deal with the giant lichen colonies pretty decently, but if you're using Tourbillon to kill lichen colonies, you've already given up any amount of efficiency you hope to achieve. Unlike the last 6 entries on this list, Tourbillon is unironically good at something. The Freed Souls in the Shroud of Apocrea cannot be targeted while you're holding a gun, which makes ranged combat a little awkward. They can, however, be targeted while you're holding a sword. Tourbillon, being a sword that fires a projectile, grants you a reliable ranged attack. It's also worth noting that the freed souls are classless. They have no special defenses, meaning normal damage weapons perform just as well as any other damage type. That, in addition to the surprising amount of distance Tourbillon covers while attacking, leaves you with what's genuinely one of the best weapons to use in the Grasping Plateau. It's not the best, there are other loadouts that are far superior, but Tourbillon is better than you think. Shoutouts to Greyhavens for delaying this video by a couple of months. You guys are the best. Number 16, Furious Flamberge. One of the many flourishes I'll be talking about. They're very fast. They've got a wide sweeping attack followed by 2 long-range pokes that cover a lot of distance, and deals only piercing damage, which is nice if you're against monsters weak to piercing damage. Flamberge has a chance to inflict fire. Supposedly. No one's ever seen it happen, but rumor has it this sword can cause fire. The same thing I said about Dread Venom Striker applies here as well. Fire is really good, but not being able to consistently inflict that fire kind of defeats the purpose of having it. 9 times out of 10, you'd end up killing whatever you're attacking before fire is even applied. You're trading your weapon's base damage for less damage. Fortunately, Flamberge is really the only fire weapon in this game with this issue, as all of the other ones are at least a little consistent, and even if they aren't, they still function well as regular weapons. Number 15, Amputator. Difficult to judge due to just how applicable the brandished weapon type is throughout the game. You can bring Amputator in all the same places you would Combustor or Acheron, it just deals a lot less damage. And it's not just the normal damage. Amputator deals way less damage than it should. I won't dwell on this topic for too long, but when I think of a normal damage brandish, I imagine it would share damage values with other weapons of the same type, but this isn't the case. Amputator's damage is just pathetic in comparison to any of the other brandishes. On its own, it's serviceable, and compared to every other sword I've talked about up until this point, it performs very well. But it's just, for example, the charge swing deals 4 more damage than Acheron on an undead training bag. The odds are stacked in Amputator's favor, and it's barely coming out on top. I brought this test into a Vanna run, and it was dealing the same amount of damage. 440 on the dot. This likely has to do with the fact that the other brandishes all have split normal damage. I don't know enough about this topic to accurately explain it, so take everything I'm about to say with a grain of salt. Split damage weapons gain double the benefits from damage buffs, since the buff is applied to both the weapon's normal damage and elemental damage. This is also the case when it comes to your overall damage bonus. Basically, split damage weapons scale much higher than those that only deal a single damage type. That aside, as it currently stands, Amputator is just a really mediocre weapon. The brandished weapon type is extraordinarily good, but Amputator is just not worth using. When you consider that all brandishes have normal damage, the versatility of having a pure normal one vanishes. You can literally use any of them anywhere, and it'll perform similarly to Amputator. But I'm not done yet. There's still a shimmering ray of hope for Amputator. Something Amputator does better than every other brandish combined that could pull it back into relevancy. Not really. Amputator very uniquely has the ability to flinch enemies with its explosions, a trait only seen in some of the lower starred brandishes. This is most likely an accident, but still a neat mechanic that lets Amputator stand out from the rest despite its shortcomings. Number 14, Fearless Rigadoon. Stun Flourish. A flourish with stun. Why would you want stun on a flourish? I don't know. But with Fearless Rigadoon, you can inflict stun. Occasionally. Okay, so stun isn't a super useful stats effect, and especially compared to fire, which is an extremely powerful effect. So it might seem strange why the fire one is ranked below the stun one. I don't know if it's just weird RNG, but Rigadoon seems to have a much higher chance to inflict stun. So much so that it outperforms the very little utility you get from Flamberge's fire. It's not very consistent, and it's also not very helpful most of the time, but the Flourish weapon type is still pretty good. Would it have killed them to add just a little bit more variety? Flourishes are the only swords that deal piercing damage, and all of them strictly deal piercing damage. There isn't a single weapon in the game that has split normal piercing, which is kind of unforgivable. This further contributes to piercing damage either overperforming on certain weapon types or underperforming due to the lack of options. Number 13 and number 12, Triglav and Sudoruska. Normal damage has a reputation of being bad, underwhelming weapons that have no real place in the game. Iron Slug and Metronome are obviously exceptions to this. Troikas surpass those expectations and deliver what's one of the strongest yet simplistic weapon types you can get your hands on. A lot of people are put off by the slow attack speed, which can be difficult to deal with if you don't know what you're doing, but the sheer force of these weapons makes up for it. Yeah, you can carry around your katana all you want. I'm about to crush this guy with an imbued slab of rocks. These are also the first of the two-swing weapons I'll be talking about. They feature ludicrous range, high damage, and they're adept when it comes to flinching monsters. Two-swing weapons benefit tremendously from sword stepping, more so than every other weapon in the game. The extra mobility is an absolute game changer. It's honestly kind of upsetting to think about how much of this game's melee combat gets completely ignored because people would rather spam brandishes all day long. Is it more effective? Yes, but where's the fun in that? Can you tell this is my favorite weapon in the game? Shatter the kneecaps of Mecha Knights with ease. With no projectiles in its kit, Troikas never proc dodging or blocking AI, which in a few select areas can genuinely outperform a brandish charge. Troikas also offer some of the most range you can find in a weapon without using projectiles. Seriously, you'd be surprised by how much distance this thing can cover on its own. The freeze application of Triglav isn't that useful. It's not consistent enough to be relied upon, and when it does proc, it tends to be detrimental. There could be a case made for it if the charge attack procced freeze as frequently as, say, Glacius, but as it currently stands, it's a direct downgrade from Sudoriska, which, on the other hand, is undoubtedly the best normal damage sword in the game. The only competition for that title would be against Amputator. Troikas struggle when it comes to single target DPS, but otherwise this weapon type outshines the Brandish weapon type in every category. We're lucky these things only come in normal damage, or else Troikas would be sweeping the meta. Number 11. Fang of Og. Okay, time to blow your mind. There exists a system in Spiral Knights where the lower your attack speed is, the more range consecutive sword attacks have. The amount of extra range varies between different types, and more so for how beneficial said range applies. And as you might know, Fang of Og is a very slow weapon. It's on par with some of the two-swing swords in terms of speed. Likewise, it benefits from this mechanic substantially. Note that this only works with consecutive attacks, not the first swing. Every attack after the first swing has greatly increased range. I cannot overstate how much additional range Fang of Og has compared to other three-swing weapons. I'm trying my best to demonstrate this with the gameplay you're seeing, but this is kind of something you have to experience yourself to fully understand how significant it is. Sword stepping isn't even necessary most of the time. Fang of Og is able to close the gap completely on its own. It's a weapon oriented around one of the strongest stats effects in the game, with an impressively high chance to set enemies ablaze with its light attack, with a damage that only barely trails behind brandishes, and I haven't even mentioned the charge attack yet. I feel like this is something that a lot of players need to hear. You don't have to use the charge attack. You're able to kill things just by using regular attacks. There's more to this game's combat beyond spamming brandish charges. If you're not in a position to tank a fire proc, then don't use the charge attack. And vice versa, if you have an abundance of healing items, remedy capsules, or if you have a Seraphynx, go ahead, use it. As long as you reach the end of the level, who cares what condition your health bar is in? Fang of Og has some of the highest burst damage of any weapon in the game. It's insane the amount of damage that is dealt within such a short period of time. A suggestion I've heard people say throughout the years is that Fang of Og should have been a cutter, since it shares the same model. And although an elemental cutter would be nice, I couldn't disagree more. Cutters are one of the worst weapon types in the game, and Fang of Og performs miles better than it would if it were a cutter. Having a "You're Dead Now" button at the tip of your fingers gives Fang of Og such a potent ability that very few weapons in this game harness, at least to the ability that Fang of Og does. Yet most players disregard it as mediocre only because the charge attack kills those who can't use it properly. It's probably the single most balanced weapon in the game, balanced in the way that it's an immensely powerful weapon, only held back by self-inflicted fire. The only problem Fang of Og has is the fact that brandishes exist, which is a statement that can be made for like half of the weapons on this list. Number 10. Final Flourish. It's like the other two, except it deals more damage. I'm going to keep this part short. The only thing keeping you from using this over the Thornblade is the charge attack. which is just up to personal preference. Both are good. Flourish Charge can flinch, Barbarous Thornblade cannot. Both attacks deal an impressive amount of damage, but function very differently. Number 9. Barbarous Thornblade. A neat quirk about Barbarous Thornblade that I don't see enough people acknowledge is that the quills fired from the charge attack don't proc dodging or blocking AI, which is obviously ideal for Devilites and Wolvers, but I also find it handy against Almerian Crusaders. As I just mentioned, BTB's charge attack isn't able to flinch, which kinda sucks, but to help with that, it deals just enough knockback to make whatever you're attacking no longer your problem. I'd also like to highlight that the charge attack has a weird delay to it, which can be kind of annoying to deal with, a place where flourishes typically wouldn't struggle as much. The flourish charge attack isn't that bad, guys. One of the main drawbacks to these weapons is that they deal pure piercing damage, which restricts their viability to a very small portion of the game, but in the places they tend to perform well, they perform very well. Number 8. Grand Faust. I'm trying my best to keep personal bias out of this. I love this sword, but it's got some drawbacks, and some of them are pretty bad. For starters, the way that the curse status is implemented is just strange. For monsters, it has a chance to deal damage whenever they perform an action. This is powerful in monsters like fiends and beasts that are aggressive and attack constantly, but with monsters that are much slower, or members of the gremlin family who run away at low health and stop attacking entirely, curse does almost nothing. Which is funny considering gremlins have a natural weakness to it. As for players, curse locks a couple of your items, preventing you from using them, unless you're willing to pay the price. This concept on its own isn't bad, but with lower amounts of curse resistance, it locks all of your items. You're just unable to play the game. You literally have to stand around and wait for up to a full minute for the curse to run out. I understand that this is more of an issue with Black Cat and Chaos. With neutral resistance, this usually isn't a problem, but the point is that with the way that curse is implemented, being inflicted with it is just unfun. Even if the curse status wasn't an issue, the charge attack just isn't good. It has the single longest charge speed of any weapon in the game, taking about 3 whole seconds to charge up with CTR max, which might not sound like much, but keep in mind most swords, heck most weapons, only take about 1 to 2 seconds to charge up. And most players aren't walking around with charge time max on their Fausts. It's closer to 4.5 seconds with CTR medium. It doesn't deal that much damage considering the unreasonably long charge time, and the sword tends to get caught on nearby walls or even other monsters, which just removes the projectile. It's not even guaranteed to inflict curse. This attack is so high risk with such a low reward, it's not worth using under any circumstances. Despite all of this, the light attack pulls enough weight to make up for it. Grand Faust is a 2-swing weapon, which means that it wrecks in melee combat. It shares all the benefits of the Troika moveset, while dealing more damage and being significantly faster. And to top it all off, the curse mechanic isn't exclusive to the charge attack. Number 7. Glacius. I can't be the only one who thinks that the brandish weapon type is just really lazily designed. It's just silly to me that just about every sword I've mentioned so far has some amount of drawbacks or a gimmick that you have to play around in order to use it effectively, and then you get to the brandish line that just explodes and deals honestly way too much damage for how little effort is put into it. Now that I think about it, brandishes probably have the smallest learning curve of any weapon in the game. As soon as you can space out the charge swing, you've essentially mastered the weapon. They have really good burst damage, they're fast with very little recovery, which in turn makes the weapon very spammable, and they're also proficient at causing stats effects. Freeze isn't super ideal. Similarly to Wintergrave, it results in monsters being stopped partway through the charge attack, but unlike Wintergrave, there's no real benefit to be had. Glacius is still very reliable when it comes to proccing freeze, and charge swing or not, you're going to be dealing quite a bit of damage. It has very few downsides, one of them being the freeze status. Freeze can be helpful, just not on this weapon type. Number 6. Divine Avenger. Let's be honest with ourselves, this weapon had to go. I'm gonna go out on a whim and say that Divine Avenger in its prime was probably the most unbalanced weapon this game has ever seen. Maybe tied with Mixmaster on release because that thing was just a complete mess. There's footage of people one-shotting dreadnoughts with the charge attack going straight through their shield. And this was before Black Cat or Chaos were added. These players likely have neutral damage bonuses. This sword was not okay. Fast forward to today, Divine Avenger is still a fantastic weapon. Not to sound like a broken radio, but 2-swing weapons are godly in melee combat. You are in complete control in nearly every encounter you come across. A useful piece of tech I found is to walk forward and swing immediately after performing the charge attack. I don't know if it's the extra damage or if the little bit of knockback really makes that big of a difference, but doing so makes the charge attack way better. You can also line up the attack so that 2 of the blades hit the same target and deal some really good damage. One of the few swords that fall victim to performing similarly to brandishes, which also means performing worse than brandishes. Number 5. Obsidian Edge. Okay, some of you need to maybe calm it down a little bit. Listen, I have no problem acknowledging that Acheron is the vastly superior weapon, because it is, but Obsidian Edge is still a phenomenal sword. Throughout like 90% of the game's content, the two are neck and neck in terms of performance. Obsidian Edge inflicts strong poison, which is, I don't need to go over this again, it's absurd is what it is. It's absurd and it's underappreciated. Something that I see very little mention of is just how effective brandishes are at inflicting status effects. This is hands down one of the best weapon types in the game when it comes to inflicting them. Seconded only to haze bombs, whose sole purpose is causing status effects. They do very little other than that. Just about every other weapon in the game is a weapon first, and then periodically causes status effects. Not only are brandishes consistent, but they also inflict strong statuses. You've got such a high chance to inflict poison, you're basically guaranteed to inflict it onto whatever you're attacking. Choosing between this and Acheron isn't the same argument as picking Blitz over Plague Needle, or using Nova Driver over one of the status alchemers. Voltage coming in at spot number 4. This sword will grant you the powers of Thor. A charge attack on this will keep your foes from blocking. After all these years, these blades are still shocking. Yeah, I'm coming straight out of lockdown. Gotta get away to keep space from the other clowns. Yeah, I'm taking 3 steps back. About to take you down, and that's a fact. With a blade that'll send you down 6 feet under. There's nothing holding back except the sound of this thunder. Striking down the likes of the machine and undead. With just a few attacks, I'll leave him hanging by a thread. There's nothing in this game that's really more versatile. After all this, I'm sure I'll make it worth your while. I don't feel like writing anymore, so I'm done. Yeah, the sword is pretty good. Number 3, Warmaster Rocket Hammer. So like, what were they thinking when they were making this? The one thing two-swing weapons lack is single target DPS, else they'd be the best weapons in the game. Warmaster Rocket Hammer is like if they took the base of a Troika, gave it an extra attack with crazy burst damage, and then made it deal elemental damage. Are you kidding me? Aside from the below average charge attack, the only issue Hammer has is how close you have to be to land the second attack, which doesn't matter when everything you touch either dies or gets flinched by the follow-up attack. Actually, were they thinking when they made this weapon? I've already explained that two-swing weapons benefit from sword stepping considerably, benefits that extend even further with the Rocket Hammer. There are so many different ways you can use this to kill things, it's incredible. Even aside from being a weapon, Warmaster Rocket Hammer provides excellent movement, which if utilized properly can make some specific running sections of the game comically easy. Oh yeah, the charge attack can also be used to move players around, which isn't actually that useful most of the time, but it's kind of funny. Alright, just a quick side note before people start protesting. The following entries are 2 of the best weapons in the game. They're practically interchangeable throughout most levels due to how universally good they are, but I've got a hefty list of reasons as to why I've ranked them the way I did. If you've seen my other ranking videos and you've seen how much I praise fire and elemental damage, then this really shouldn't be that surprising. Number 2, Acheron. Acheron is busted. Genuinely an unbalanced weapon. Do I think it's the best sword in the game? No. This is mainly for 2 reasons. 1, fire. 2, elemental damage is just an overall more useful damage type, to which I will elaborate. Alright, I've decided to move the bulk of this information into a different script, because I've expanded on this topic too much to the point that this segment was way too long, and most of what I have to say has nothing to do with swords. So in order to save your time and make my life a little easier, I'm going to skim over most of the details while still delivering the gist of the whole thing. The majority of Sparlance's late game content has you against enemies that are either weak to elemental damage or resistant to shadow damage. Dreams and Nightmares is a bit of a weird one since you're technically up against everything except fiends, which would favor shadow damage, but Void Gels are strangely weak to elemental, and status effects, like fire, are really effective throughout the entire mission, which leans back in the direction of elemental weapons. Out of the 4 danger missions, elemental damage is optimal to bring for 2 of them, while shadow is only ideal for 1. For shadow lairs, elemental damage is effective in 3 of them. and you're gonna want to bring some fire weapons to Ice Grade, which leads to elemental damage being useful in all 4 of them. Meanwhile, shadow damage is only worth bringing to 2. Even for events, the Cataclysmic Conversation, March of the Turtle Drones, Apocrea, and the Dark Harvest all involve members of the Fiend and Undead monster families. Even within the game's procedural generation, constructs will often appear in places they normally shouldn't be. Mega Knights, Gun Puppies, and even Lumbers may spawn in place of other monsters. Trojans and giant lichen colonies also tend to spawn in place of one another, seemingly at random. If you wanted to ignore all the applications of elemental damage I've just described to you, the game will still throw enemies that are weak to it at you. Acheron is genuinely a problem. Bearing no stats effects, it yields the highest damage of the Brandish family. This is probably the best weapon for burst damage. It doesn't require as much setup as Dark Retribution, nor does it necessitate as much positioning as something like Wintergrave or Grim Repeater. The amount of damage you're able to deal with a single attack with how little is put into it is insane. The existence of Acheron just upsets me. Someone okayed this. Somebody at 3 Rings made this weapon, looked at the damage values and said, yeah, that looks about right. This sword is the reason why the previous 21 entries are completely irrelevant. Number 1. Combustor. I'm sure you understand by now that elemental damage is useful throughout basically all of Spiral Knights. Combustor is one of, if not the most versatile weapon in the game, for multiple reasons. The combination of single target damage and AoE on a weapon type that attacks this quickly, while also being this good at inflicting fire, leaves you with what can only be described as a balancing nightmare. It has split normal damage, which means you can use it against literally anything and it'll do well, and the fire status, which is, you know what, you're at this paragraph for me, I'm done. Combining the principles of the Skylark's engine with the technology powering the blast furnace produced this brutal blade, which can ignite even the most flame retardant materials from a distance. I knew it said this. I had read the item description multiple times before, but it wasn't until I heard someone else say it out loud that I realized something. This weapon is badass by definition. It's a sword made from the engines of a spaceship. Like, I don't think there's anything in this game more metal than that. I hope I've made it clear by now that brandishes are extremely good at inflicting status effects. They're among the most reliable weapons in the game and inflict the strongest version of whatever effect is on the sword, which might be an oversight, but I'm not complaining. Acheron benefits from exactly none of this. It has higher base damage, yeah, but you're missing out on such an important aspect of the brandish weapon type. Combustor is a simple yet deadly weapon. It deals immense damage, so you'll almost always meet stagger thresholds. The charge attack deals an absolutely biblical amount of burst damage. It shares all the benefits of the brandish weapon type that I've already mentioned, while also inflicting what is probably the strongest effect in the game. This isn't just me glazing the fire status for the 11th time. Strong fire is a force to be reckoned with. If there were an elemental brandish without a status effect, I'd likely rank Combustor above it.